El Movimiento, a Mexican-American civil rights movement across the United States in the 1950s to 70s, where Chicanos fought for equality in education, politics, and economics, critiqued the pre-existing discrimination against them. While the United States proudly boasts of consisting of united immigrants, El Movimiento pointed out the injustices Mexican Americans were still facing and that they were still not treated as equal Americans. The movement was sparked after the Vietnam War, where Mexican American towns were put on the front line and treated poorly after coming home. They were not treated as heroes and were denied many rights that other American veterans were given, such as education and health insurance. Due to this treatment, communities of color had a national response to racism in education, politics, and economics.
Perhaps one of the most influential and long-standing movements within El Movimiento was the United Farm Workers Organization, formed by Cesar Chavez in 1962, which used nonviolent tactics such as boycotts, marches, and strikes to fight for equality of Chicanos in agriculture. Chavez revealed the inconsistent treatment between white farmers and Chicano farmers. Most of the Chicano farmers of the time lived under treacherous living conditions, without water, electricity, and bathrooms. And most of the time, entire families would have to work on the farms just to attain basic needs. Of course, these harsh conditions were only seen in minority groups, such as Mexican Americans. In fact, most of the time, white men and women did not even work in the farms because it was considered below them. Even though there were labor laws in place preventing most of these things, landowners often ignored them, and frankly, the government did too. The UFW focused on improving these working conditions, receiving insurance benefits, safer environments, and workers' rights to help create equality among all farmers in America, essentially to resolve the glaring gap between the treatment of Chicano farmers and white farmers.
Another movement formed by students was the Chicano student movement, whose motivation was to challenge American society's promising system of education and to rid it of inequalities between whites and Mexican Americans. Chicano schools were treated inferiorly to other schools during the time. They received less funding, outdated books, and poor facilities. Oftentimes, they were referred to as dirty Mexicans, Hispanics, and told they crossed the border. The student walkouts were motivated by a desire for other students and teachers to understand them for who they were and to accept them for that. They were Chicanos, and they were proud of that fact. The first instance of student involvement in El Movimiento was in Los Angeles, California, in March of 1969. More than 10,000 students participated in a blowout when they stood up in the middle of class and left to protest racism within the school systems. Other instances of blowouts were seen in Denver, Colorado, with the West High School walkout, where 300 students and members of the Crusades marched for equality. The march ended in police firing and the arrest of 25 people for political crimes.
The American legal system and police claim to protect Americans from injustices. However, in the case of Chicanos, the legal system and police were doing just the opposite and contributing to these injustices through brutality and unfair trials. Another organization formed in the 1960s to enhance the Chicano movement was the Crusade for Justice, which largely helped the student organizations. They marched with students in the Denver walkout and helped organize many other student walkouts across the country. The Crusade for Justice also fought against Chicano police brutality and helped negotiate unfair legal cases concerning Mexican Americans. The founder and main leader of the Crusade for Justice was Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez. His main goal of the Chicano movement was for Mexican Americans to embrace their culture and use it to better themselves and gain rights that they were denied. Although some Chicanos disagreed with his philosophy, Corky strongly believed that the Mexican-American culture should be preserved, not diminished.
Another influential leader of the Chicano movement was Reyes Lopez Tijerina, who is credited with beginning the movement in New Mexico. Tijerina is responsible for organizing a movement to force the United States to respect the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the treaty that ended the Mexican-American War, by granting Mexican Americans the right to land taken by America in the violation of the treaty. The movement in New Mexico was started through the Tierra Amarilla courthouse raid, led by Tijerina. On June 5, 1967, Tijerina armed and led his supporters to the courthouse in Tierra Amarilla, New Mexico. There, he made a citizen's arrest on the district attorney, who had prohibited him from reclaiming lands previously owned by Mexican-American citizens. This organization and movement exposed the people to the injustice of land being taken away from Native and Latino people through demanding that the United States respect the land grants for all people. The corruption and robbery of land drove Mexican Americans into poverty, isolation, and racism. His leadership in the movement inspired people to fight back and openly demand for their rights. Tijerina has been given names such as King Tiger and the Malcolm X of the Chicano movement.
These movements ultimately resulted in an educational fund for Mexican American students and protections of their civil rights. The awareness critiqued the mistreatment of Mexican Americans and resulted in voting rights, more funding for Chicano student organizations, bilingual education, and employment opportunities. There were also advancements in the economic middle class, so by the 1980s, the Mexican Americans were consolidated in the community. Although El Movimiento was not as well known as other civil rights movements, it still made headway in spreading awareness about the injustices suffered by Mexican Americans.